Okay, I would like to call this meeting to order and recognize that we are on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox Nation, and we are grateful for their care and stewardship of these lands since time immemorial. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda, please?
Move to approve agenda.
Thank you, thank you. All in favor? Thank you. Delegations, nothing. Reports. EV charging station policy. Very exciting. Come on up, Kaylin. They're in.
They're in.
Yay.
In fact,
First step.
they're completed this morning. And
Wow.
Courtney's already been over trying to plug her car in, so we better get at this.
Testing.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, Council. Good to be in front of you today. In front of you, you have a report, not specifically around policy, but mostly around guidance around how to set fees. There is discussion of policy, but it comes later, and it's going to be a bit more work. So, looking at the recommendations, as you can see that one, we're looking for direction or our councils to set an interim rate, a rate that we've kind of based off of BCUC proceedings, BC Hydro, and what other communities around us are doing. And then later down the road, direction to direct staff to update the fees bylaw so that we can actually set the fees for EV charging station for our community. And as we adopt more down the road, we the staff have an operational piece to guide us there about how charges and how rates are supposed to be. And then finally at the back piece there, as we've opened up more questions through this report, is also direct staff to come back with direction around a policy on how EV charging stations can be further implemented in our community. So just by way of background, I know some of our repeat council are very familiar with this project. It's been going on for a while. 2019, I think we agreed to it. So this is an overarching grant that was led by the Regional District in Nanaimo with some supporting help from Canadian Energy Association, who are sort of the facilitators and coordinators of the project. But it included like 18 or many different communities on the coast and filling a gap for EV charging stations. We have these two dual port level 2 chargers, which they, are quite often found in these downtowns. They're kind of a smaller, slower charger, but they allow for a nice little top up to encourage people to come into town. If you're out for an hour, half an hour, you get a top up of a bit of energy, and it encourages, the idea was to encourage people into sort of our commercial cores and our areas where we want people to be. So that was the intent. It took a really while for all of this to unfold, as you can imagine, having these many communities involved. So we are not exactly the grant holders or responsible for the grant program, but we're partners in the grant through an agreement, the partnership agreement, which sort of outlines what our roles and responsibilities were in this process. The first one was selecting our locations. And so staff went through a process. Big thanks to Joel, Engineering Tech, because this was a real, kind of infrastructure technical piece of understanding not only where it would best serve the community, but where our infrastructure is most accessible and we can make the best use of it. So at the end of the day, we chose the Cultural Center, close to its proximity to the downtown. It had the right sort of connection and hookup for us to use. And just seemed like a more economically and sort of best way of going about as far as situations of where to put it. It provides great access to the downtown core. It can also be used as a public civic center. It'll get a lot of use by people who are visiting our community, and hopefully attract some people into that parking lot. So to date, the financial contribution on behalf of the village is 26.67% of the entire project. And so that was when we signed the partnership agreement later in the fall. We also provided a check of just over $14,000, and that's been our financial contribution to the project to date. And so we don't anticipate any other further costs going through it. But as we look at sort of setting fees and prices of how we're going to charge for EVs, $14,000 is our initial investment. And there's other costs that are associated with it as well. As you can see, charging fees. There's a process we're going to go through. There's also network fees. And so these are smart chargers. And so what they do is they work as a group, as a radio group they're called. They communicate with each other. But this means that one, staff here, we have a dashboard, a website access that we can watch and see the performance of it. It captures a whole lot of data around us, amount of energy used, and it's got a lot of environmental data that it captures about stuff we've diverted or energies that we've saved as far as our own contributions to the climate. And so that, in order to access that network fees, there is a cost, a yearly fee of about $1,200 a year. And so that's another operational fee. Staff are recommending we maintain that. Under the first year, we've got the first year paid for as part of the grant process. So this year, this will be a cost that we'll have to think forward for next year, but also a cost that's going to be a regular yearly operating cost on behalf of just running those. There's also service agreements that are available. Currently, we do not have one right now. But the service agreements actually, right now we have a warranty on parts replacement. So if there's anything that faults because of the product itself, they'll come and fix it. If someone comes in, vandalizes it, that'll be the village's responsibility. But the charge point and the service that's provided provide service agreements as well. And they cost an additional $2,000 a year, and that will provide everything from monitoring the software and the hardware, making sure it runs. When there's signs of it needs repair, they'll come and service it. If we did this on our own, if we recognize staff would have to monitor the dashboard, we identify there's faults with it, we would have to hire a contractor to come in and fix it. So these service agreements are really just a shortcut to having this type of service. And so staff have recommended as well that we consider that as an additional cost to it. It seems a much easier way and less intrusive than having our operational team have to work with something that they may not be fully familiar with. And lastly, we kind of look at energy pricing. It's really hard to get a good sense on what people charge through their charging stations because, one, this has largely been the sharp tip of the spear. As you can see in my report, most municipalities are still offering free charging. And a lot of private businesses too, because they're trying to entice you to come to their businesses as well. So that seems to be the standard price with probably about 80%, 90% of chargers to date. Communities now are moving away from free charging, especially with public ones, because they recognize there is a fair bit of cost associated with it. It's just they haven't been able to track that information or data to be able to get an understanding of exactly what these stations cost on their behalf. So one of the things that we did as staff, as I look towards the BC Hydro as a regulated utility, they have to set their prices by going through the Utilities Commission. And so they specialize in high-speed, high-powered chargers, unlike the one that we have here. So you can see in my report, they've gone in front of the BCUC and suggested rates that include the cost of the energy coming out of it and the cost of the maintenance and operation of those charging sites themselves. And they came up with the price of a 25 kilowatt charger of around, I think it was 12 cents per minute, right? And so we've done a simple math conversion just looking at the rates of what our energy puts out as a 7 kilowatt or 7.2 kilowatt charger, estimated about a quarter of that. And so that's how we got to the value that I've presented in there, which is about 4 cents a minute, about $2.50 an hour. And then we look back at the communities around us and what they're doing, and we're right in the ballpark of the types of charges. So the city of Courtenay right now just had their EV chargers started this weekend. They haven't put forward a pricing policy yet, but we know the town of Comox has a pricing policy. It's $1 for the first hour and $2 thereafter. The town or city of Campbell River do free for the first hour, and I think $2 an hour after that. And so in the CVRD, I think most of them are free. And these are located at quite often civic facilities as well. So free is quite often, especially if they've been there a while, they've been established as that as well. So what we're asking for within this report is to allow staff to set that interim rate using that BCUC, and we've recommended around $2.50 per hour. And then give us time when we go forward to move forward with updating the fees bylaw to sort of track some of that data and actual costs. Because this is kind of what we need to do, is we need to understand over the course of 6 months or so how much money and energy we're putting into these things and be able to come up with a better idea of what the actual cost is. And then we can include that in the fees bylaw itself. And then after that, kind of leads us to a bigger question around policy. And so staff would eventually like to address things as we develop more access to public chargers. The one at the fire hall is a good example. Do we need to have a bit of different understandings of policy that directs or where the public can access chargers, and where things are better used or safer used if they're meant for that facility and people in that facility only. So those are some of the things that we'd look at as a policy piece to bring back at a later date.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
So there's 4 charging stations?
There's,
4 cars, two stations, 4 cars.
yeah, we have 2 dual port charging stations.
It's okay. We can come back to you. Anybody else? Go ahead, Councillor.
Thanks. So I'm just thinking about, how we might consider paying for this, and I was wondering if our, the funds that we're getting from the province for climate action, if they would fall under the criteria for that and could be funded through that grant. And then whether we've considered sponsorship for these like we have for some of the other things that we have around town.
We at this point, it's not one of our recommendations as far as sponsorship, but it is an idea. I think right now we have a sponsorship agreement offers out for a couple of other pieces of infrastructure. To me, that would be a good sign of the appetite for these types of things. The trouble with charging too is there's going to be variable costs dependent on demand and season and stuff like that. So, we looked at a sponsorship agreement right now. I don't know what a good number would be to offer somebody as the cost of doing that type of business.
Look at just sponsorship for the hard costs of the service program and the
Yeah.
$1,200,
The network fees and the service fees.
yeah,
Yeah.
the sponsorship program for that, and then the consumers pay for just their electricity.
Yeah.
And that would take the maintenance part out of it.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, one of the things that we looked at for the other infrastructure, the bike wash station and the RV Sandy dump, was the opportunity to install the hardware and technology to make it a fee for service, and that doesn't really exist. And that's unique about the electric vehicle charging station, is I think a lot of users are just expecting and have the app and the hardware and software all exists. And so there's a different opportunity to make it a user fee-based system with these, as opposed to those other comparators.
Yes, thank you for the clarification. Anybody else?
And you have to have the app to
To act-
charge there?
Yeah.
And that's how it charges, and then it's charged through the app.
Yeah, and so Courtney was just trying it today, showing us how it works. And so you use your app on your phone to bring it up, and you find your locations. When you get there, you tap it up against the machine, and you plug your car in, and away you go. And it takes moments, and it's a long charging. Like if you were going to go for a full charge, it would be a long process. And so the idea is here is we're providing a service while people visit our community and have, go for a walk in the trails or go visit our downtown core. And charging becomes a really good point for getting people off of the chargers themselves. Otherwise, they just become quasi-parking spaces. So
Yeah.
it does incentivize people to move on. And so some of the other municipalities that have a bit more sophisticated parking practice, where they can get into to getting a bit more is that you actually pay for the parking, and it's not the charging that causes the biggest fee. And so down the road, there's other options to add a bit more value to these as well.
Other communities, have they seen any vandalism? Those are hard costs.
Yeah, and you talk to the service agreements tends to be the most used piece, and even with the people that own the hardware that install the software, they said they do get vandalism up and down the island from time to time, and I don't think it's any different than any other piece of infrastructure we've had in our community. But these service agreements seem to be really good, because they're on a network. When there's an issue, whoever's monitoring it knows right away. And quite often for staff, it might be when we're told, or if we're not going to have somebody sitting there monitoring and watching that stuff all the time. So, and for $2,000 a year, that goes everything from looking after the parking spot pad, not just the electrical infrastructure as well. So it's all part and parcel of the whole thing. So.
So staff is asking for direction on whether or not we want to have a break-even charge or a profit chart. Well, we can't charge a profit, but or if we want to subsidize this. So can I get some feedback on that?
Thank you, Mary. Just so I'm clear, that the $2.50 an hour is where right now we're estimating it being cost neutral. So
Okay.
those fees would cover the cost of operating and maintaining that infrastructure,
As far as we know now,
as far as we know now.
without the service agreements.
Well, right now we don't have a service agreement.
Yeah.
So with the service agreement.
Oh, with the service. Okay.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was suggested that we start with $1 an hour, is that? So,
250.
oh, okay.
Yeah, and so, and what that means is a lot of municipalities are still subsidizing this service, and it's a lot of it's because they don't understand the actual costs of it right now, and the when electrical charger stations started visiting our communities, it was to incentivize people to utilize that, and as there's more demand on this infrastructure now, municipalities are now moving towards cost recovery, and so. It would be, and we do have, there's ways that Campbell River and Comox have done that, is incentivizing by a low initial rate. Campbell River starts as free, and then they jack that rate, or they bump that rate up after that first half hour is free to $2 an hour. And so, $2.50 an hour is an average, and there's ways that we can go about it while providing incentive and still using that cost recovery.
How long does it take to fill up a car?
At
mean,
this rate.
Yeah, it's variable as far as I'm understanding, depending on the quality of the car. But our charging station are kind of a slow feed charge, and so my understanding is you'd need to be there for a considerable amount of time to get a full charge, which is, again, is not the kind of idea behind these chargers. This is just sort of a nice amenity while you're in an area, just, get enough
Top
charge.
up.
I think 1 hour you get 30 to 40 kilometers worth of charge off our charging stations. And so there is a lot of variability between chargers and between vehicles. The newer cars, the more higher end cars, they charge a lot quicker, which actually costs the consumer less in power when they charge compared to the older models that would take a little bit longer.
Right. Michelle?
Well, when we first became part of this whole group project, they had kind of explained these types of chargers as being kind of like a 2-hour charge while someone goes and gets lunch, does a bit of shopping. Like, that was the whole idea of it. And just before council starts to make their decision, it really is a good idea. Like, I know the other municipalities might not be doing it now, but they will be, and they're going to have to increase now. Like, whereas if we start off right away doing cost neutral, or making sure our costs are covered, then you're not having to get somebody used to something later on. It's properly done. That means, we're looking after the taxpayers' assets, like all of that kind of stuff if you're doing a cost neutral. But if you subsidize, then we're paying for some tourism to come in. And I don't think it's the same as it used to be anymore. Like, I think that it's an okay thing to be cost neutral on.
Yeah.
And the overall cost to the users, right? If they're going to be using these chargers a half hour to an hour, the difference between us and Campbell River is 50 cents.
Yeah.
Right, and so in the big picture, even over 4 hours at 50 cents more, we're going to be costing, and these are not the kind of the impediments to the decisions of where they charge, it's location.
Yeah, I don't think 50 cents is incentivizing someone to purchase an electric car or use it or not. I
Or
think there's a
not come into our
decision long
community and
before
park
that.
there.
Yep.
Or not pay for an hour charge here.
Yeah.
Like it's, yeah.
Yeah, you need to charge. Just like if you need gas, you need gas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so should we go around? And do we want to make this a revenue neutral thing, or are we looking to subsidize?
I'm happy to go with the revenue neutral idea, yeah.
Thank you.
Really palatable to people who are complaining about the bike wash and for revenue neutral. Maybe less incentive less incentive even to vandalize it if, somebody's feeling like we're not subsidizing out of towners. So.
Thank you. Councillor Kettler?
Yeah, I think, it does attract people to the downtown, and so there might be still an opportunity if we do set it sort of at revenue neutral costs are always going to be increasing. So when they do, or if we decide that we need to put away for replacement costs or whatever, those things, that we could give the business district the opportunity to sponsor and drive their business. And so, I'm happy with the revenue neutral now, but sort of looking into those options for the future would be great.
Thank you. So I think we have a motion there.
I'll move that the committee approve the interim adoption of the electric vehicle charging station rates equivalent to the rates set by BC Utilities Commission for the BC Hydro's electric vehicle charging stations, and that the committee directs staff to initiate the bylaw amendment process to amend the existing village fees bylaw to add electric vehicle charging station rates and to set rates based on a revenue neutral basis. And we've given that direction to staff to draft a village electric vehicle charging station policy and report back to council.
Seconder. Thank you. All in favor? I just had one more thing before we end this. The charger at the fire hall, there's a suggestion that it be moved to emergency service personnel use only. And I just want to make sure that visitors to the fire hall can also feel comfortable using the charger while they're visiting emergency personnel while they're there, but they may not be an emergency personnel person.
And absolutely, we'll address this in the policy.
So yeah,
The
visitors
policy.
too, or something. Yeah.
My understanding, Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, there is a sign right now that directs that station is meant for people that are
Yeah.
accessing the fire hall. And so be it a tradesperson or a person that's visiting, that's their entitlement to use that. What we want to avoid is people charging and plugging in overnight.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously, as our emergency crews have to go about their business.
And as I understand, there's also instructions to not move if there is an emergency and all that safety
Yeah,
stuff
so
as
much
well.
things,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, wastewater upgrade project. Paul, in the flesh. Thanks for coming.
Good afternoon. It's great to be back, and I guess
And you're not even asking us for more money. Not
No.
right now.
no, not right now. Just a little segue from that previous presentation. I've never yet seen a discussion in wastewater about offering introductory rates
Right.
to encourage people to use wastewater. Right. It's almost the reverse, and of course, with water, you end up with the reverse, where you have rates to discourage the use of water.
Yeah.
So yeah, quite a different thing when you want people to use more of something or use less.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of wastewater, they use what they use, and it's pretty static. So, with that said, it is good to be back. I'm pleased that for today's report, I'm not asking for anything, and especially not money. Doesn't mean that might not happen in the future. I never say never.
Yeah.
But for today's report, it's an update and a little bit of a history, especially for the two new councils. I wanted to refresh on some old stuff, and I actually had to remind myself of some old stuff and even why we're doing this thing in the first place. So what I propose to do here is just highlight a couple of parts of the report, which I hope you've all read, and I hope also that some of you had chance to read more or less of the reading list that you were given before Christmas. I wanted to say that there'd be a 2-hour closed book examination on it, but
Ready.
yes, I know that some councillors have been more immersed in it than others.
We're all copying her answer.
Interesting thing, the first section on here about the previous council resolutions, and it's like, well, I should go back to where we actually first approved the project, a resolution that had $9.7 million in it, which is a big number. And so there it is from July 23 of 2018 when we were applying for funding. It's the first official time that we committed to the possibility of this project. And the bottom line there, that council supports the project and commits to its share $2.619 million for the project. So at the time, That's what Cumberland was committed to, but it's also important to recognise if we didn't get any of the funding, we would have had to have done half a project, and it was estimated to cost 5.4 million, and Cumberland would have to come up with all of it. So it's one of those things, there's few options, and all of them involve Cumberland spending over in the millions of dollars. We got a whole bunch of grant funding, which is great, and I was originally hoping we'd be able to get out of it with Cumberland spending $0 from reserves. That's not the case. But 4.5 years ago, that is when we made that funding application. And yeah, to hold the 9.7 from then to now, unfortunately not achievable. But that's how it started out. The rationale for the project, I think the most interesting point there, the last line of the rationale. Phase 1, Phase 2 having a combined value now of 14 to 16 million, and it was then 9.7. It was and still is the largest project in the town's history, and probably by a decent margin. I suspect if you were going to today build from scratch the dams up the hill, it would challenge that number. But in any case, for most towns of Cumberland size or a bit larger, the wastewater plant typically is the largest thing that they've done. And in the case of Seashell and Powell River and Tofino, that's certainly true. And thankfully we're not in the same order of magnitude as Powell River and Tofino. The project delivery model, construction management, it's an unusual one. Instead of just design it and tender it and build it, the main reason we chose this, it's the best model for dealing with unforeseen changes during the construction process. Here it is, we haven't even got to construction yet, and we've had plenty of unforeseen changes. It doesn't mean it's a perfect process. We've been able to deal with the changes largely because we aren't under construction yet. But even so, that still has its cost in terms of extending the project time. But this particular delivery model, if we had designed the whole project and put it out to tender, we would have been doing a huge amount of change on stuff that had already been tendered. So it still is the right model to use. It doesn't insulate us from cost increases, but it's allowed us to manage them in the best way, I think is the way to summarize that. The project team, that's just for information there. There are other minor players, but the major ones are there. For phase 2B and C components, this team will change. We'd originally wanted to execute all of phase 1 and 2 with that same project team, but the way it's playing out, for phase 2B and C, the create a new creek channel and fill in the old one and so on and so on. We won't need to use Maple Rind as an integrated sustainability, and so it becomes almost a separate project. But for right now, that's the team we have, and we carry on, and hopefully that team's work will wrap up at the end of this year or early next year. The project scope and structure. Yes, it's changed. The evolution there, if you've all read it, I don't need to go through it all, but the key point is the third of those 4 tables. Whichever way we go now, Cumberland's reserves, we're committed here for up to 2.1 million out of wastewater reserves, whether we get our extra grant funding or not. It is all allocated. I'd love to say we might not spend it all, but the way it is with these things, it's budgeted and we assume it's going to be used. And so for this project, that's our hard cap, is Cumberland's reserve, and unless we get any other grant funding, then we're in the third column there, revised budget without a grant. Still a total of 14.27 million. If we get our grant funding, extra 2.5, that's great. We get to do all of the nice parts. The reed bed and the wetland, we still get to do it anyway. That's part of that structure. We realise that the channel relocations and so on, the permitting and so on, we simply won't be able to get them built this year. So they are separated, and it's actually been a good thing to do that. We made this decision last fall. it's going to take time to plan them, and for doing that work, we don't need a heavy-duty construction company like Maple Grinders. We're better off with a specialist company that's done that sort of work before, and EcoFish is a company that has managed those projects before. So smaller, more focused scope of work for those, so if we get the funding, it'll be a different project. And not stated in my report, we still have an opportunity this fall to try and squeeze a little bit more funding for the wet stream relocation habitat enhancement part. That'll come up in the future report later in the year. Our project schedule. Yes, originally we hoped to design it in 2021 and build it in 2022. We've spent 2 years designing. We're going to build it this year. That little bar chart, it didn't come out quite the color coding as I'd intended, but the idea was the 2B things, you can see some of them are more darkly shaded. They were meant to be really darkly shaded because those are the things that are dependent on getting additional funding. So for the moment, if we don't get it, most of our work wraps up this year, and possibility of commissioning should wrap up this year, but it still might drag out into Q1 for the phase 1 works. We'll see. We'll know more information on all of this in another 3 months when I come back with the next quarterly update. And in theory, by then, we'll have a funding decision. Now, the province has always said a decision in spring. And when I've pushed them on that, I said, well, yeah, when does that mean? Does it mean by the time the crocuses bloom, or does it mean before the summer solstice? And they said it could be either of those. So we're just not sure. And the more uncertain about that, the more we've had to plan it on, all right, let's focus on the things that we know and we have to do, and anything that's grant funding dependent, we will push off until we have a decision. The one slightly different one on that is with the tertiary filtration, where we've got to design stuff for that because it's in the main works area. So for that one, we do pre-design because it relates to everything else, but actually buying a filter doesn't happen unless we get the funding. Which brings me to the grant funding. Okay, so a wonderful exercise in accumulating all of our different funds. We're still waiting on the $2.5 million from gas tax to see. I think I'd still say we've got a better than 2/3 chance of getting that funding, but beyond that, I know nothing, and of course we don't get told anything until everything's decided. So whenever I've asked a question, it's just like, it's in process, and we will tell you in the spring. So that's been the answer for the last 6 months, and that will remain the answer. The phase 1 construction budget. So on to actually what we're doing right now. We actually have a real world budget here on page 8 of my report, based on what we've spent or what we've committed to spend, meaning a purchase order has been issued for, say a $500,000 piece of equipment, and we'll have to pay the balance, pay half now and half on delivery, but that's a committed cost. So that committed cost column really represents if we were to stop work today, cancel the project, but pay out on everything we'd committed to pay, Cumberland would be up for $6.5 million. So we're roughly halfway there. And the forecast cost to complete is obviously our current best estimate as to what it will take. The construction services category there, it's all forecast at the moment until we actually go out for the tenders, which I've said in here it's late February. I think it's going to be early March, but we'll see. Anyway, as the tenders come back in, we get more refinement. With the equipment, we've done pretty well. We've been getting progressively more and more things sourced and bought, and we've even had an example case where something came in at $100,000 under what we expected. It's fantastic. Right, that's one, and there's a whole bunch that
Went up. Yeah.
So anyway, it's progressing. When I give a next update, which I guess nominally a quarterly update, so 3 months from now, a lot of this forecast cost will have turned to committed cost, all of our final designs decisions will have been made, and hopefully we'll even have a funding decision. So the next update I give, I'll actually be able to have a lot more definitive information about that budget. Are we challenging the fact we've only got $340,000 of contingency unallocated? Is that better or worse, etc.? So it'll be a much better update, and hopefully it'll be an update, not a request, right? Unless we get the grant funding, in which case it's a request to go ahead with that. The policy references section, I cut and paste that out of an old report because I'd been so long since I've seen that, I thought I should put it in to remind everyone, including myself, this was a policy-driven project. Back in 2016, I stayed up all night long reading the Comox Valley Sustainability Strategy and other such wonderful documents, looking for all the relevant references, and the Cumberland OCP was a treasure trove of them. So how can we action as many of those? And when we had our committee going back in the day, our aspirational goals were to try and action as many of these. Phase 1 of the project is all the mandatory stuff for achieve compliance and allow for some village growth, but most of these other ones is what's being actioned by Phase 2. Just a point there on village growth. This has been sized for a doubling of Cumberland's population. One of the design changes, and I now realise it's not stated here, we'll have more of this in the next report. Anyway, one of the design changes, the tertiary filtration units, it ended up being that we needed 2 that reached good for 1,800 cubic metres a day, total of 36. And when we got the tenders back, we had ones that were that, and from that manufacturer, the next step up in their standard units, double the size of the unit, was an increase of, I think by memory, about 150,000 for the 2 of them. So instead of 700, it'd be 850,000, and we go from 2 of 18 to 2 of 36. And we chewed on this one for quite a bit. It's more than what we need, but in the end, we landed upon we're actually better off to upsize, and we have. So these solid separation units and the future filtration, when we do it, will be sized for a total flow of 7,200 cubic metres a day, and more importantly, it would be a design population of 16,000 people. I can't imagine when Cumberland would get to that. But there's a lot of future capacity there. In the meantime, that extra capacity means that our threshold from when we use our tertiary treatment to when it's at capacity and we have to go through the bypass, the wet weather bypass, it was at 3,600 by design. It is now at 7,200. And what that means is the number of days per year, as we are right now, where we would be going into bypass mode goes from 50 down to 10. So it's a significant improvement in our wet weather environmental performance. Having this extra tertiary treatment capacity, it's great for future population that may or may not materialise, but in the meantime, for our wet weather situation and the huge flows we get, it is being put to work, and we will be putting out cleaner water on 40 of those 50 days. So that actually is an improvement, and we have provision to expand it by adding one more version of the 2 that we've got. I don't know that that would actually ever be needed. That would handle a population of 24,000, right? That's ridiculous for Cumberland, but one asterisk on that, if you ended up with some interesting industrial development out in the Bevan Road area, you already have one food processing operation out there. If somebody came along and said, oh, great, you've got water and wastewater out there, we will set up a large, not a micro, but a large brewery, you would have a significant population equivalent load. So one of the things here is it's providing capacity for future industrial development, should you need it. But in the meantime, it's treating our stormwater load. So that's one of the benefits. It is actually where a little bit of money went into that change. The innovation portfolio was a good thing to remind myself too of a bunch of the different things we're doing for the first time here, which is good. because you're doing things for the first time, it sometimes means it's a bit more work because we're breaking trail. The chlorine dioxide in particular, it's great on disinfecting viruses. The aquaculture industry uses it for that purpose. They transport tanks full of water and live fish, and they disinfect it with chlorine dioxide because it's fish friendly, which is great. But it's been the one question mark from Comox First Nation in our consultation. We've never heard of this. What's its impact on the fish out there? And so we've had to bring in third-party reviewers on this. It's the first time it'll have been used in Canada for wastewater. It's been used in drinking water before and in aquaculture, but it's a first for wastewater. So it's not that it's bad, it's just that we're the first. So that has its own implications, which we're working through, and we hope for a successful resolution of that. But that, for Comox First Nation, their main point has always been from day one concern about pathogens out there in Bain Sound, and that we adequately kill them all, and that whatever we use to kill them, that the residue of that doesn't kill the fish in the process. So we think chlorine dioxide is the best way to do that, but we just have to go through the process of demonstrating that.
Just a question. That dissipates as it gets down Maple Creek there over time?
The way it works with chlorine dioxide, it does its chemical reaction, and then the residuals, you actually get rid of it by aerating the water off gases. And so we will be doing that at the end of the process. And so then, yes, there shouldn't be anything left by the time it hits Maple Lake Creek, but even if there was, travel time through that creek before you get to Trent River and Bain Sound. So it's we're pretty confident in that one. The fact that aquaculture uses it all over the place doesn't get much better than that. Just to close out the report and then take the general questions. The operational costs, I think I've had the same wording in here for a year, that once our design's finalised, we'll determine what the real world operational costs are. That's still true, and that's still coming. In the meantime, it's costing us operationally with the staff time as we do all of these things, but we work through that. And the financial implications section, it is what it is as long as we don't need any more budget. I think it's the simplest way to look at that, and we're doing everything we can to stay within that. The climate change implications, we've designed it to be as best as it can be. It's going to be using more energy because of those changes with the aeration. For the first time in this section here about the biochar, we can now sort of quantify how much we're going to need, and it's interesting, there will have a one-time carbon sequestration of about 50 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent by putting the biochar in there permanently. A different question is whether we want to try and get that officially certified, because we might find that it takes a lot of time and energy just to get that officially certified. If anybody knows any farmers, of which I am one, the process of getting a farm certified organic is so much time and trouble that a lot of farmers don't do it. We might find a similar situation here, but nonetheless we are putting carbon in the ground permanently, which is great. So with that, that is the report. I think, once again, the pre-advertising, the next one will have actually a presentation and lots of the finalised design and all sorts of interesting things and animations of the process, and between now and then a site visit, and you can walk around and see and feel and taste the air, should you so choose. But that's my report. Thank you very much, and questions please.
Thank you so much, Paul. There was some really excellent information and also some really good news. That upsizing makes me feel so much better given the rain events we've been having recently and probably will continue to have. And it's, as you know, very expensive to separate the stormwater. So if we can, yes, thank you. Thank you, thank you.
I had almost forgotten about that detail in getting lost in all the other things. It's like, oh yeah, we are going to be treating more water every day, every wet day, which is is great. The original project concept we had back in 2016, where we applied for funding back at the time, was to do a treatment plant good for 15,000 cubic metres a day, and we'd be able to treat all of it all the time. And here we are, we're exactly halfway to that, and we're able to treat all of it for 355 days a year. All right, so to get those last 10 days, you got to double the capacity. So instead of the 80-20 rule, we've got about a 95-5, actually a 355-10
Yeah.
rule, and it becomes unsustainable to reach for all of it. But we're halfway there. It's great.
Yeah, fantastic. Questions? Go ahead, Councillor Kettler.
Yeah, just to start off with that, the tertiary filtration, that is, a consequence, I guess, of having such an old system that does have so much inflow and infiltration, compared to, like you've said in the reports, we have, compared to our regular sewer flows, we have 1 to 20 times that, and a normal community is 1 to 3 times wet weather flows. So that is something that you've had to consider throughout the design process, and it's I think for what you're saying, the cost differences between those systems, that it's worth doing, as well as giving us the capacity to do more with development in the industrial lands possibly. But I just want to say it was a great report, and I didn't mind the review, going back in time a bit, and remembering all the things that we've talked about and been through. I was hoping you could sort of help me out though on the schedule, the project schedule. I'm happy to see that we're doing the reed bed and wetland design in Q1 and 2 of this year, because that always seemed to be something that was getting pushed off previously, and that's that project, that part of it is something close to my heart. But I'm wondering how it'll all work if we, are we going to use that reed bed before we have the tertiary filtration? So we'll be putting things through the reed bed without tertiary filtration and without the storm channels, the Maple Lake Creek channels?
It's a great question. So to be clear, the reed bed gets built this summer regardless, and we broke it up like that because, first of all, our GMF funding had said we're going to build the reed bed in the wetland. We had no idea about stormwater wetland and the other stuff at the time. So it needs to be built, and the reed bed and the wetland distribution, sending the effluent to the wetland area, that area is now going to be just to the other side of the lagoons, are the things that are really related to the wastewater. So the stream relocations and so on are quite separate. So it's great we can make that separation. Yes, if we don't get our funding and we build this without the tertiary filtration, we will be taking our solid separated water and chemically treated phosphorus removed water and putting it to the reed bed. It will perform a filtration function. Exactly how much, we don't know, because it's a naturalized system, but it does something. So yes, then in the future, once we add the filtration in, it gets better. Elsewhere where these things have been put in, constructed wetlands following systems, they have been able to polish tertiary filtered water. One was just commissioned last year up at Okanagan Falls doing exactly that. And one I know of in Australia, it took water from a membrane bioreactor and it was able to polish it further, which is pretty impressive stuff. So I don't think it'll be an issue if we don't get our funding and we have to go on as is, where is. It's not an issue. The real thing with the tertiary filtration, as opposed to our nutrient removal and solid separation, the tertiary filtration is a requirement for the modern regulations for our situation, very low dilution. So even though we're under our old permit and it doesn't require it, we have to change over to the current regulations by 2026, and at that point we have to have the filtration. So it is an interesting possibility of a cart before the horse if it plays out like that.
Okay, I just wanted to know that it was possible, and that's all okay if it does go like that for a few
It is.
months or years. I did have one more question about the disinfection, and so the third-party peer review that we are having done. Will this council be presented with that as well?
Yes, we will. We can give you that for your reading pleasure, and I think you might enjoy it perhaps more than some other people. The reviews are, there's more scientific references in these reviews than you can poke a stick at. But yeah, we'll provide them.
Great.
And they're interesting. Sometimes, I think it's fair to say they delved into some areas that wasn't actually the core focus of the review. Right, and that's a little bit frustrating if we're trying to focus on this and the review covers, yeah, these things. But they are interesting. Yeah, I'll put that as part of the next
Bless you.
package.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Just to be clear on something you just said, with the tertiary filtration, so if we don't get the grant, we're still gonna have to come up with $750,000 for that
Between
by
now,
2026?
something like that. And an asterisk on that, between now and 2026, we will complete the Stage 3 Liquid Waste Management Plan process. And when that gets approved by the Minister of Environment and stamped, it's in force, that becomes our new regulatory instrument. One of the things with the LWMP process, it can also authorise borrowing for the municipality, so that you can borrow money to do whatever's required without need of a referendum. Because the concept is you've done so much public consultation as part of the LWMP process, you don't need the referendum. So this is a long-winded way of saying if by then we don't happen to have 750,000 in reserves that we can do this, we would write it in as part of our LWMP. The future works requirement and the borrowing authority would be the money for that. Right, so it means Cumberland's borrowing, but that's where how it would be done. And I'd like to think between now and then we'd have certainty, if we don't get our grant funding, you know, exactly how we'd play that out and whether there is enough in reserves and how it would stack up against all the other future required works. And just as a little sideline to that, the 2026, when we have that LWMP completed, registered, one of the requirements is almost certainly going to be that Cumberland will have to do serious works to get this wet weather peaking factor down from 20 to 1 to something less. We're never going to get it down to 3 to 1 like everyone else, but my goal would be we get it down to less than 7,200 cubic metres a day so that we're within our tertiary treatment capacity, for example. And it might then require millions of dollars to do the remaining storm sewer separation and a whole bunch of other things. So future works that are required won't all be about treatment. There's going to be more about collection and storm separation.
Just to add to that, it's not just the $750,000 that would need to be done within 5 years. So I think it's like 2.18 million or something.
The seismic upgrade, the channel infill and relocation, yeah, there's more to it than that. So I think, thank you for the reminder. Once we have a decision on grant funding, right, instead of an if or, then we'll know. So we'll be able to come back and say, okay, here's exactly what the future is and isn't. So.
I was on a webinar about green infrastructure today, and they had one of the examples they had was a community, I think it was in the States, who had millions of dollars worth of storm separation that they needed to do, and instead they moved their community to all kinds of other stormwater management systems rather than digging up the roads, and they've managed to reduce it by a significant amount. I can't remember the numbers. So we can also ponder that in the next couple of years while we figure out where we're going to get the money to separate that stormwater.
That's an interesting one. So instead of separating it, they created a new stormwater system on
Yeah.
top of it on the surface.
Yeah.
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 I know of other
much cheaper.
places where they'd done the opposite, and they'd actually put all the houses onto a pressure system. Each house has a pump and so on, and you leave the storm sewer system, the combined system now becomes storm only. So it's a different, each of those examples are a different way of achieving separation by creating a totally separate system. And the normal way we've done it here, of course, is we then have 2 pipes in the ground, storm and sewer. But yeah, depending on your situation, those innovative things are possible, and it's good to hear examples of that.
Yeah, yeah. Looking
I
for
love
successes.
innovation.
The other thing I wanted to say is I think 2 out of 3 of the grants are federal. Yes?
No.
No.
No, that's a really good point. So the first grant we got, Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, ICIP, is joint federal and provincial. So of a project cost of 100%, 40% from the feds, 33% from the province. Green Municipal Fund is actually municipal. Even though it's funded by the federal government, they give the money to Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and it is then considered municipal funding, which is great because it does not count as federal funding for the stacking limits. Right? And that's a key feature, and
Nice.
this is how I game that system, which I did at Seychelles and again here. So otherwise, the GMF money, if we got, and we've got the equivalent, I think, of an extra 7% funding from GMF, you'd have to subtract 7% from the federal. But it's considered municipal, so it adds on top. Right.
Nice.
And then the third one, Gas Tax Strategic Priorities Fund, is, depending on who you speak to, either considered federal or provincial. UBCM, of course, says it's a provincial one. So it's a different beast again. And for our phase 2 stuff, GMF will layer over that, and GMF can layer over any other funding without running afoul of the stacking rules. And our other phase 2 stuff, funded by GSPF, is totally separate from the phase 1 stuff funded by ICIP. So GMF overlaps with both those others, but the other 2 don't interact with either.
Okay. Thank you. Good to know. Any other questions? Thank you so much for this. It was really nice, actually, to go back and look at how innovative this project actually is. And I hope we've communicated that to all our granting agencies.
That's how we got the grants.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thanks for being
here. That
here.
literally is a big part of the reason why we
Yeah.
got them. And they have always been clear it's part of the reason why they give the grants is that doing the innovative stuff, it just is more expensive in the first place.
Yeah.
And GMF are very upfront about that. That's literally what they're paying us to
Yeah.
do. So look forward then to the next update where we'll have much better stuff and go and do a site tour and get our boots muddy and all those fun things. And as I say, hopefully it too will just be for information without a request.
Okay. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to ask is about the committee. Are you?
Okay.
Yes.
Good question. We will need to start a new committee for the liquid waste management plan. Right, so the other one, we finished our work in 2018. Some of the members are still here, some are not. But actually, we will officially strike a new committee, and I'll come back to council with a report about the stage 3 LWMP and a roadmap and the whole thing to kickstart that process. Just thinking out loud here, because you caught me off guard with that question.
Sorry.
I'll come back with a roadmap sooner rather than later, as in probably sometime in Q2. And we will want to start some of our technical work. But for a committee, I wouldn't propose to form the committee until the fall.
Okay.
I think even though the first time we did this, we formed it in the spring and we did a huge amount of work through the summer of 2016. And it was with great cooperation from all the committee members, but summer's really the best. It's not the best time to demand everyone's time from the public.
Right.
So that's my thought map. How about that? We'll start the public part of it in the fall.
That's excellent. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, and we just need a recommendation to receive that report, please.
Move receipt.
Thank you.
Second? Oh.
Thank you. All in favor? All right, strategic priorities quarterly reports.
Okay, I can just start us off here. So we have October to December, a summary of the activities relating to your strategic priorities. and also some major projects and initiatives that have been added as well, and how we've tracked those. There's also a summary of our climate change successes. There hasn't been a lot of change since your last quarterly report on that, but it's part of your strategic priorities reporting now. The financial services is your finances for the last, well, really for the whole year now, how it's worked. And there's what the RCMP called their third quarter report, but of course it's for our fourth quarter. It's for October to December. There's great information on the development services, good stats. And then finally, your council resolution list that shows whether or not something's in progress, completed. I have a few highlights for the fourth quarter. Of course, the charging stations. We did get just over $62,000 for the 125th, which was quite a bit less than what we'd asked for. So we have a bit of work there to do. And then a bunch of other good things that happened. Like, I don't know if you guys have had a chance to look at the website, but it looks it's all restructured and it looks really good. And we managed to get the development cost charge bylaw adopted. And council just recently adopted the parking variance policy, which a lot of that work took place in 2022 as well. And something else that was really great is with the operations staff partnering with the PAC on that Egremont zone safety zone projects, which was really great too. Be good to look at that. And so yeah, the quarterly strategic updates tracking report is attached for questions. We can answer them, and then if you'd like the further reports, staff can update you on their updated reports.
Thank you so much. I see that fire and bylaw services didn't make it in. Are they
Yeah,
doing?
it is our plan to put those in every quarter. So
Okay.
yeah, we did.
So they'll just do both next time.
Yeah, we can do that. Yep, update for the last half of 2022, perhaps.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Questions on any of this? Councillor Kettler.
Yeah, you just mentioned the sort of safety improvements in front of the school there on Egremont, and it kind of said, I think, in here that it was completed. But I was wondering if we were going to put any more signage, or perhaps we had discussed putting those kind of foldable indicators in the middle of the road, if that was something that was still on the list for us or not.
You're speaking to the silhouette.
What is the proper term for
Are those the silhouette signs?
those floppy things?
I think.
The ones that can compress if they're driven over, like,
I don't remember having a discussion about those.
okay. And so I guess the question is, are there any more improvements planned for the school zone
For
area?
Egremont, no.
Okay.
Yeah, so we've highlighted the 30K school zone signs. I believe there's flashing signs on them. And we've done the improvements like the sidewalk, and then some of the improvements on the far side for accessibility, I guess, to the crosswalk or what have you. So yeah, keep in mind there's the Elverston three-way stop there as well. So I mean that's a form of traffic calming in itself, right? So
Yeah, and I was just sort of trying to go back to that conversation we had with increased traffic once the new daycare facility is done, and then, the parking problems that already exist on Egremont there. If we could do additional traffic calming, and what sort of direction would you need from council to find, because we did bring some examples, I think, to council of what other communities done with those center line folding traffic calming things. I'm not sure exactly what they're called, but if we could investigate that, or
I'd suggest through the transportation master plan, we've collected data, traffic data and key locations, I think including the Egremont zone. I think it's really good to use data to first help inform if there's a real issue. And then go from there and come up with, I think, suitable solutions. So yeah, stay tuned. Stay tuned for more information on some of the key areas in town where I think there's concerns. But
so you're saying like maybe once the new facility is built, the new daycare facility is built, we would have more traffic, collect more traffic information then, and then take action based on that.
yeah, I'm not sure that, I know there's going to be some added traffic. It's just I'm not sure what direction it's coming from, right? So I don't know if it's going to come from more of the new development area. Again, it's something we could collect more data on in the future to help inform if additional traffic safety improvements need to be implemented. But yeah,
And
I-
they
I know
also
it-
possibly might need to have traffic calming from a different direction or something like that.
potentially, yeah. I know the traffic volumes now are very low, like very low, other than the drop off and pickup times, 2 times a day when the parents are dropping off and picking up their kids. So, yeah.
So, and do we have the final design for parking, or how that parking's going to be arranged for the childcare center?
The on-site parking?
Yeah.
Yes.
And there's just a drop and go.
There's a one way in,
Yeah.
one way out. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Questions?
Just about the timing of starting up the recreation, arts, and culture master plan. It indicated it's on hold at the moment. Is there any thoughts as to the restart on that?
I can give it a stab. Yeah, at this point, I would say it's unlikely to get going. Well, the consultant's basically just been put on hold, and they said that they will need a little bit of notice before they can get going again. So I think staff have not given that notice. At the earliest I see this fitting into work plans would be later spring into summer. That's best guess at this point.
Yeah,
though.
and our community stakeholders they're okay with that right now, are they? Or for the most
I think
part?
everyone would like to see us picking that back up. It's just not practical
Yeah.
from a staff work plan perspective at the moment, and we want to make sure we've batted back and forth some options of trying to at least keep the ball rolling a little bit, and we felt like this deserved the dedicated attention of a full commitment to get it going.
Yeah.
As opposed to trying, which likely would result in the same timeline for completion than if we just did it kind of partially right now,
Okay.
if that makes
So
sense.
just to add to that, like so the whole idea of putting it off is because of the whole interim assignments at the moment with the vacancy of the CAO
Yeah.
in 2022. So that's kind of the ideas, and that's going to continue into March or whatever. So that's why we want to.
Oh, I know you're very busy. I just
That was just sort of where it came from.
Okay.
Getting that
Thank
was
you.
that was one of the areas that we felt should be delayed for this vacancy, because then you can put a lot better effort into it once you get back to it.
And is there a rescope of that's needed prior to that will come to us, or are you working with community partners on that, or what's that look like?
What we discussed with the consultant was less a rescope and a better job defining the project. And no, I should take that back. There was some additional scope that we discussed adding, but never formalized what it would look like in terms of our engagement process. And part of that was about better defining the project, and we feel like we're in a better position to communicate the foundational facility planning component now that we have done the release of that public infographic. So we're feeling like once we sink our teeth back into that project through a better engagement planning process and a clearer definition of scope of project to the community. My thought, and looking back at some old notes, would be to come back to council with a committee of the whole, recognizing we have a new council now, and like the project's going to have to, in some ways, be relaunched given
Yeah.
this break.
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
I'm just looking at the MRDT, the district tax program for taxing Airbnbs. Is that project going to be coming? I see it's not started either. Is that a project that's going to be coming back on?
I would say that is really driven by the tourism service that we've joined. That's where I think that work's going to start. So
Okay.
they're going to do a strategy, and we'll play a big part of that. And I'm sure that's where we'll provide that feedback to them that we want to look at that, and that'll be part of their work plan probably.
Okay.
Councillor Kettler?
Yeah, so I know that we kind of tried to piece out the tree bylaw under the urban forest management plan. Is that what's coming forward this month? Yes? Okay.
Courtney
that's
says
won-
yes.
That's wonderful. And then there was, I can't find it in here, but it was on the list about an initiative that came forward from the regional district around gas stations and basically removing the petroleum-based fueling stations from all zones within the village, and I was concerned if the interchange lands were to come up for development again in the near future, that there would be a possibility that we would be inadvertently supporting a gas station installation there if we didn't have the zoning in place. So I was just curious about where we are with that.
So I was looking at that item recently because, I think where we are with that item as of now is that something we would consider in the next zoning bylaw update, which is not imminent. Spoke with the regional district staff recently to understand where they are, and it sounds like that's their bylaw changes aren't imminent either. So I was unclear if there needs to be any other action from village staff except just considering that at the time we do a zoning bylaw update. And I haven't done an analysis of our zoning bylaw or any other work on that at this point.
Yeah, I guess if it does come up in terms of the interchange lands, that we could look at maybe taking that one zone and applying it there, if that's where we think the interest might arise from, outside of other or a more complete zoning bylaw change. We might want to tweak that one little thing. But I'm not sure where we're at. So I'm not sure what the sort of risk is at this point with it. Yeah. But I'm glad that you've talked to the regional district and have that background information. I think for them that it's not too many places where they have to make that zoning change. So I guess kind of the first step for us would be to see what zones we do permit it in, how much of a change would it mean to our zoning bylaw.
Okay, well, I think we can probably provide that information pretty easily to council and go from there.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks.
Yeah,
so
that
much.
would be helpful just to know if it's even allowed out there. And then the zoning bylaw update would follow the OCP, yes?
That's
Yeah.
right.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions?
Are we doing questions on the whole report all the way down to
Yes.
the policing,
Yep.
everything?
Yep.
I've just got a few questions about, well, Courtney's here at the table. Where is the Victory at? And is that kind of stalled?
They have submitted an application to extend their HAP and their development variance permit. So we're working on that.
Okay, so they're just, so they've been 2 years now, is that, and those have lapsed and
That's
they're-
right. They lapsed after 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're still in,
They're wanting to continue.
okay.
Yes,
But still haven't actually put any shovels in the ground.
that's right.
But
Okay.
we have our parking lot back, which is
Yeah,
nice.
the hoarding all came down, so I was wondering what, the boards all came down and. it
We
looked
got
like-
excited for a minute, but nothing happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a couple other resolutions then that are still in progress and have been for some time, I think. The speed limit review, I imagine that's going as part of the traffic plan,
That's right.
okay? The business license bylaw review, is that?
Did that happen?
There was one in here,
I do believe that council did get a council report on a review that took place of the business licenses and business license. However, I'm not sure that the changes actually came forward, so that will likely need to happen all over again, and then we'll, like with new updates, and figure that out, and then we'll come back to council.
and the co-op housing resolution, that one was on there like from way back. Did we review if there was any village land available for a co-op housing project?
Well, I think we have a fairly good idea of our land available through the property and facilities review, and I reached out to that association and had no response. So I feel like that's probably all that can be done at this point with that resolution. If they come back again, we have information we can share to them.
And which who did you reach out to?
Co-op Housing Association of BC, I think they're called.
Okay, so that's a province-wide association.
There's, the Federation of Co-op Housing, and
Okay,
I think
had it a
that's
bit
the
wrong.
main one. We have reached out to them over the years. There was a lot of interest in 2018 when we started the last term, that they wanted to move up island, but then they just really have fallen off the map. And I think, I saw recently some announcements with the province with their new funding for rental, that it looks like the Federation, the Co-op Housing Federation, is involved in some of those purchases that the province is making, and co-management of those things. So I think they're probably pretty busy now with that, and I don't think they'll be seeking their sort of strategy of moving North Island for a while, unfortunately.
Yeah. Other questions?
No, go ahead, that's
I was just wondering about the good neighbor bylaw development, so we've only had first reading on it, correct? So, will current council be given an opportunity then to adjust? I know it was from previous council, but will current council be given an opportunity to look at it? It looks like you're going more with a focus, which is most members of the community has the focus on repeat nuisance calls rather than just having long grass, for example. I mean, is there an opportunity to tweak that a little bit?
What we really want to focus on with that good neighbor bylaw is actually coming back to council with a really good bylaw enforcement policy first. And then I think that will help council understand what that bylaw can do for you instead of what it will not do for you. I think that's the important part of that bylaw, is to focus on the tool use of that bylaw rather than us, making sure people's grass can't
Yeah.
be, that kind of stuff. And a good bylaw policy will do that for you. So, but it's at first reading. So that's why we stop that, and we're going to get you a good bylaw enforcement policy back to you, and then it'll go, like, it has to go through the motions, and you can always make changes to any bylaw after, like, before
Yeah.
third and adoption.
So we're gonna have the
You have
the bylaw
opportunity, yeah.
enforcement policy first. Okay.
That's right. That's our plan.
Thank you.
Councillor Therrien, did you have more?
Nope, I think I'm good.
Anybody else? I have something while everyone else is thinking about it. So I think it's in the climate list, we mention our no bottled water policy. And as you all know, we've recently learned that firefighters are dependent on plastic water bottles right now on the truck. And so there's a bit of inconsistency there. And I just want to raise that because I think we need to deal with that somehow. And I'm not sure how we do that, but maybe we can look to other communities. There's got to be a workaround for cases of bottled water ending up on the trucks, I would think,
Or
without putting them in danger of
Yeah, maybe it's a
dehydration.
case of writing in an exception for emergency
Yeah.
service.
Yeah, I
Something.
noted that, I haven't done some more research, but I noted that last week, and I
Okay,
think
awesome.
we'll look into what our options are.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? All right, so we just need a recommendation to receive those reports.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Thank you. And question period. Anything? That whole update report, people of Cumberland, so many items on there to ask questions about. So many amazing things happening and in the works. Really good to read that report. If you're out there watching, I would suggest you go look at that report.
Both of you.
Well, to all four of you.
I'd just like to apologize for my late arrival. I
Oh,
had
yes, thank
vehicle
you.
issues that left me quite stranded.
Uh-oh. Yes, and we don't have an official update from Councillor Sullivan, but he is still ill and not able to attend. So we are wishing him well, and if everybody could just send him positive healing thoughts, I think that would be really helpful. He's having a hard time. Nothing? All right. Then I need the recommendation to move into closed, please.
I'd like to make the motion to move into closed session.
According to section
Oh,
90E
sorry.
and I of the community charter.
Thank you. Seconder?
Seconded.
Thank you. All in favor? Nice. Thank you. And a motion to adjourn?
So move.